Between September 1911 to November 1912, a spree of horrific and gruesome murders took place across the United States. All of these events made national news, leaving citizens in complete shock. In September 1911, Colorado Springs, Colorado, 6 people, 3 adults and 3 children in 2 neighboring homes, were all found laying in their beds with blunt force trauma to their heads. Police determined an axe was used in these murders. In the same month, September 1911, a husband and wife along with their young daughter were also murdered by an axe killer. A month later, October 1911, a man, his wife, along with their 3 young children, were also murdered by an axe killer. 8 months later, June 1912, Villisca, Iowa, a man, his wife, their 4 children, and 2 other children staying in the home were also murdered in their sleep by an axe killer. None of these axe murders were ever solved. Less than a month after the Villisca axe murders, on July 7, 1912, the Bronx, New York, Julia Connors was walking home from attending confession at her church. Close to her home in broad daylight, Julia was attacked, raped, stabbed multiple times. The attacker slit her throat, stabbed her in the heart, put her in the box and left her for dead. Julia was found in the box by a passerby. She was rushed to the hospital but soon later died from her injuries. 17 days later, on July 24, 1912, Carmel, Maine, 14-year-old Naomi Mitchell walking to the corner store for necessities the family needed. On her way home from the store, Naomi was attacked, raped, and her throat cut from ear to ear. According to records, the murder was gruesome. 2 days prior, her mother gave birth to a baby girl and was not feeling well. Naomi made this trip to the store for her mother. 4 months after the Naomi Mitchell murder, on November 21, 1912, Boone County, Arkansas, Ella Barham stopped at a friend's house to see if her friend could help her make a hat. The friend was unable to help. On her way home, Ella was attacked, raped. Her body was dismembered and thrown down a hillside. All of these murders made national news, from the Colorado Springs axe murders of 1911 to the November 12th murder of Ella. This nation was in shock over these gruesome murders that occurred over a 14-month period. Although all of the axe murders went unsolved, the murders of Julia Connors, Naomi Mitchell, and Ella Barham were quickly solved. The public wanted justice. They wanted some type of closure to these gruesome murders. Somebody had to pay the price. But were these murders solved? Some residents of Carmel told me I needed to investigate Irish and Fuller roads. There have been claims loud screams of a female could be heard late at night deep within the woods. I was also told many people died tragically on Irish Road, but I wasn't given details. I started my search with Carmel murders. I entered Irish and Fuller roads. To my surprise, there was a murder of a young 14-year-old Naomi Mitchell in 1912. Out of curiosity, I went to the woods off Fuller Road close to Irish Road. I did a spirit box session and was shocked at what was captured. Naomi, are you here? Naomi? The Mitchell family lived off Irish Road in North Carmel. Phineas Mitchell was a farmer. Evelyn, his wife, was expecting to give birth at any time. On July 22, 1912, Evelyn gives birth to a baby girl, Shirley Mitchell. 2 days later, on July 24th, Evelyn wasn't feeling well after giving birth. There were certain items needed from the store. Evelyn couldn't make the trip on this day. And on this day, it was Evelyn's birthday. Knowing her mother wasn't feeling well, her daughter, 14-year-old Naomi, was going to make the trip to the store. Naomi stops at the neighbor's home to see if her friend, Edith Wheeler, would walk to the store with her. Edith's mother said no, it would be dark soon. Naomi made the trip alone. The store Naomi was walking to was at the corner of Fuller and Horseback, approximately 3 miles from her home. Inside the store were a half dozen or more men. Also in the store, a farmhand, 33-year-old Jasper Sherman Gray, who went by J. Sherman Gray. Mr. Gray was mentally challenged, probably had the mentality of an older child. A news article referred to Gray as an idiot. Naomi walks into the store to pick up the items needed for the family. She leaves the store walking down Fuller Road. Mr. Gray leaves the store soon after walking up Horseback Road. When Mr. Gray reached a small bridge, he was seen walking back towards Fuller Road and was heading in the same direction as Naomi. This was the last time Naomi was seen alive. When night came, at first Phineas and Evelyn, Naomi's parents, didn't worry Naomi hadn't come home yet. It was thought she may have stopped by a neighbor's house for a short visit. But at 1 a.m. Thursday morning, Phineas became alarmed. Naomi was still gone. Phineas went to the neighbors' homes looking for Naomi. When nobody saw Naomi, the neighbors formed a search party. Due to the darkness, the search was called off until daybreak. At daybreak, the search resumed. Shortly before 9 a.m., the purchase Naomi made from the store was found neatly piled on the side of Fuller Road. Naomi's wallet was nearby. This was approximately 3/4 of a mile from the store. One of the men in the search party saw footprints in the dirt next to the road. A few feet away from the footprints, a female side comb was found. The men saw a trail of downtrodden grass, some described as if a body was dragged through the grass. Within those woods, the body of Naomi Mitchell was found. Naomi laid upon her back, partially nude. Her throat was cut deeply from ear to ear. Her clothing was tied in a bundle placed at her side. Naomi's hands were tied behind her back with strips of cloth. A cloth gag was in her mouth, securely knotted behind the back of her head. Her murder was seen as only a madman could have committed. Naomi was mutilated. Instantly, J. Sherman Gray was accused of Naomi's murder. For the next few days, like a wild animal, Mr. Gray was being hunted down. Due to the anger of the community, Sheriff White feared J. Sherman Gray would be killed the moment he was captured. At this time, I didn't know much about the Naomi Mitchell murder. What was really strange about these captures was the man's voice who said, "I didn't kill her, Butch did." The name Butch was brought up over and over again. At this time, I assumed the man who went to prison for killing Naomi was the murderer. I didn't question who killed Naomi. I was only curious if a young female's spirit was out in these woods. 1 month prior, I was at the Carmel Historical Society for open house on Carmel Day. This is the first time I've ever been in this building. I was only 2 months into investigating the activity I was encountering at the Lamb House. I was upstairs recording, wondering if anything was going on in this building. I heard the voice of a female say, "Help me." Many months later, some members of the Carmel Historical Society told me the building is haunted. I told them the first time I ever stepped into this building, I did hear a voice of a female asking for help. I asked if I can investigate the building. They agreed. On 2 separate investigations, this is what was captured relating to Naomi Mitchell. Now, the last time I came up here, there was a woman up here that said, "Help me, are you still here?" Are you up here now? Help you? Who is the female upstairs? I didn't think Naomi's name always coming up was a coincidence. At the Lamb House, I encountered two different females, Naomi and Rachel. They are sisters. I opened a full investigation into who killed Naomi. These spirits were more than willing to talk. Naomi Mitchell, do you know what year you died? What was the year? Naomi, you're the only witness as to what happened to you. Do you know who killed you? How did you die? J. Sherman Gray, are you here? Did you kill Naomi? The name Butch Powell coming up again. Once again, these spirits are adamant Butch Powell killed Naomi. I conduct another investigation. This time, a spirit admits to killing Naomi. Who's responsible for Naomi's death? The one that said you're responsible for killing her. What's your name? Butch Powell, are you in here? Are you at this house right now? Butch Powell, what'd you do to kill her? Butch Powell. You said you killed Naomi Mitchell. Is that true? Did you kill Naomi Mitchell? What? J. Sherman Gray spent time in this mental hospital in Bangor. Mr. Gray was mentally challenged, and there were times his behavior would be unpredictable. Gray was accused of butchering a cow. What's not clear, if this was done for food or was a psychotic episode. Either way, the cow did not belong to him. Gray was also arrested for stealing women's garments. Due to his mental status, Gray was sent to the state hospital in Bangor instead of to jail. One newspaper article claimed J. Sherman Gray attacked women. However, that was not accurate. In 1908, Gray was released from the mental hospital. In 1912, he worked as a farmhand off Horseback Road in North Carmel. Newspaper articles state the townspeople did not associate with or befriend Mr. Gray. They just tolerated him. On July 24th, while in the store with a half dozen or so men, Naomi comes walking in. There were men in the store teasing J. Sherman Gray, telling him Naomi liked him. From what I was told by two Mitchell descendants who have knowledge of what took place that evening, the teasing got out of hand. This all happened in front of Naomi. Naomi pays for her items and leaves the store. I can't help but wonder if Naomi was upset over this incident. This incident was bad enough. One of the men from the store talked to the Mitchell family about what happened. The granddaughter to Charles Mitchell stated, family members believe that Gray was teased and encouraged to follow Naomi from the store, telling him Naomi liked him. He was seen by family as MR and easily manipulated. My grandfather felt there were townspeople at the store who shared some of the blame for that reason. After Naomi left the store, not long after, Mr. Gray leaves the store. He is seen at a bridge on Horseback Road. A witness states Mr. Gray backtracked and went the same direction as Naomi. After the body of Naomi was discovered the next morning, J. Sherman Gray was immediately accused of Naomi's murder. I believe this accusation is based on what took place in the store, the men telling Mr. Gray Naomi likes him, and another person's statement that he saw Gray go in the same direction as Naomi. At this time, there is absolutely no shred of evidence Gray killed Naomi. His guilt at this point is based on assumption, speculations, and suspicions due to the type of person Gray was. Based on one of the news articles, it states when the men were talking to Gray, Gray showed no interest in their conversation, nor did he look at Naomi. Once Gray was accused of Naomi's murder, armed posses were formed. They were going after Gray. I strongly believe Gray was warned, and he took off running for his life. A few days later in Brooks Village, approximately 25 miles from Carmel, a lady found Mr. Gray laying in a drainage ditch. Mr. Gray said he was hungry. This is when Mr. Gray was captured. When questioned by the husband from the lady who found Mr. Gray in the drainage ditch, her husband asked if he killed Naomi. Gray said he was in the store, but he had nothing to do with Naomi's murder. When the sheriff arrives to Brooks Village, he questions Mr. Gray. Again, Gray denies the murder of Naomi. Gray was taken to the Penobscot County Jail. After in custody for a number of hours, the sheriff announced J. Sherman Gray confessed to the murder of Naomi Etta Mitchell. A news article, August 7, 1912, Bangor. A confession that he murdered Naomi Mitchell, a 14-year-old girl, at North Carmel the night of July 24th was made to Sheriff T. Herbert White in the presence of witnesses today by J. Sherman Gray, who earlier in the day was held by the grand jury on a charge of murder. Gray told his story with no apparent emotion. He said he enticed the girl into the woods, tied her hands behind her back, and cut her throat with his jackknife. Gray said that he wanted to kill himself afterwards, but did not know how to do it. He declared that he wanted to be confined in an insane asylum and desired to tell the whole truth and get as light as his sentence as possible. If this news article is accurate, if this is the exact information Sheriff White released to the press related to J. Sherman Gray's confession, then Gray's confession contradicts the facts. Before I point out these contradictions, here is an interesting fact. Mr. Gray was held for murder of Naomi based on grand jury's findings, even though there was no evidence to show Gray murdered Naomi. Unless Gray pleads guilty, this case will go to trial. With no evidence to convict Gray beyond a reasonable doubt, Sheriff Gray needs a confession. On the day of the grand jury's findings, Sheriff Gray, along with others, interrogated Mr. Gray. If Mr. Gray could be easily manipulated, it wouldn't take much to get a false confession. I strongly believe Sheriff White told Gray the grand jury found he murdered Naomi. It's possible Gray was told he will be put to death, or at least spend the rest of his life in prison. I believe Sheriff White convinced Mr. Gray there is no way he was getting out of this, but then offered Mr. Gray an alternative. If you confess to killing Naomi, he will see to it he spends the rest of his life back in the insane asylum instead of a violent prison. When Sheriff White released Gray's confession to the press, some statements did not make any sense. First it was said Gray told his story with no apparent emotion, but then Gray said that he wanted to kill himself after killing Naomi. If Mr. Gray felt suicidal over his actions, you would think Mr. Gray would have shown a lot of emotions during this confession. But this is what really got my attention. In Gray's confession it states he had enticed a girl into the woods, meaning to attract or tempt her into the woods. However, based on all the news articles and reports, there were visible footprints in the dirt on the side of the road showing a violent struggle. It was believed Naomi did everything she could to fight off her attacker. There were signs the struggle went from the side of the road, across the cornfield into the woods. The men who found Naomi followed the trail that showed this struggle. Gray's confession he enticed Naomi into the woods was far from accurate. I strongly believe Sheriff White offered Gray the insane asylum option if he would confess to Naomi's murder. I have no doubt Gray was convinced he was going down for Naomi's murder one way or another, and was given an option that suited him if he confessed. I can't find any records or statements J. Sherman Gray was represented by an attorney during this confession. Without this confession, the prosecutor had no evidence to take this to trial. At this point, this is the evidence against J. Sherman Gray. A lady stated she saw Mr. Gray sharpening his jackknife before going to the store the night of the murder. A man said he saw Gray walking in the same direction as Naomi the night of the murder. If you're waiting to hear more evidence, this is it. There is no more evidence other than Mr. Gray's confession. This is the problem I have with Mr. Gray's confession. As the granddaughter to Charles Mitchell stated, J. Sherman Gray was mentally challenged and easily manipulated. I have no doubt J. Sherman Gray was manipulated into a confession, and Mr. Gray did not have proper representation by an attorney. The lady that said she saw Mr. Gray sharpening his jackknife the night of the murder, these are pictures of jackknives from the early 1900s. A knife this small can cut someone's throat. However, the report states Naomi's injury was one deep cut that went from ear to ear. A much larger knife had to have been used to cause this type of injury. When Mr. Gray was captured, there is no blood on his clothing, nor was any of his clothing found with blood. The murder weapon was never found. I don't believe Mr. Gray had the mentality to cover up a murder by getting rid of the evidence. All they had against Mr. Gray was his confession. Due to the nature of this rape and murder, and what the newspaper said about J. Sherman Gray being deranged, a madman, an imbecile, nobody was coming to Mr. Gray's defense. Due to the anger of the citizens fueled by the press, one way or another someone had to answer for this crime. 37 days after the murder of Naomi Mitchell, 29 days after his capture, on August 30th, 1912, J. Sherman Gray was sentenced to life in prison hard labor. On March 11th, 1944, at the age of 64, due to inflammation of the heart, he died of cardiac failure. There is no doubt, based on what the spirit said, he did kill Naomi. The spirit said something I didn't know about Naomi's case at the time. I spoke with an old resident of Carmel, the grandson to Edith Wheeler, who was Naomi's neighbor and friend, if he heard anything about Naomi's breast being cut off. Shockingly, he said this did happen. After doing more research, I came across some information that shed light on this. From a Bangor Daily News article, 6 days after Naomi was found in the woods, on July 30th, deputies returned to the crime scene to make another search for J. Sherman Gray. When they approached the area where Naomi was found, they made a gruesome discovery. A part of Naomi's body, which had been missing, laid within 20 feet of the spot which they found Naomi. The deputies said, "It seems strange that it had not been discovered before. I was able to view a record that stated this part was in fact Naomi's breast." Investigators were certain the killer, being Mr. Gray, came back to the crime scene to dispose of this body part. They felt this information was important enough to release to the press. But after investigators got a confession from Mr. Gray, this vital piece of information was buried. On the day this evidence was found, Mr. Gray was miles from Carmel. Investigators knew whoever dropped this body part off at the crime scene was the killer. This information would have been devastating to Mr. Gray's confession. Instead, rumors were started when Mr. Gray was captured. Naomi's breast was found in his possession. These rumors exist to this day. I have no doubt this is the voice of J. Sherman Gray. In 1912, there was a newspaper article that came out stating Naomi's murder was a striking parallel of that of Julia Connor's case. She was the 12-year-old girl murdered July 7, 1912 in the Bronx, New York. On July 8, police arrested 2 men in connection with Julia's murder. One man was described by police as a park lounger. In other words, he was a suspect because he was homeless. On the same day, police were also going to arrest a young man, Nathan Schwartz. Schwartz was recently paroled. He was in prison for attacking a girl. They had no evidence connecting these 3 men to Julia's murder. They were on a list of likely suspects. When police went to arrest Nathan Schwartz, they claimed he committed suicide by inhaling gasoline. Police claimed Schwartz left 3 notes. One scribbled on the wall, another note was attached to his shirt collar, and a third note scribbled on a newspaper. In one of the notes was written, "I am sorry for stabbing the girl to death, inflicting 41 wounds. I was driven insane by the sight of a beautiful woman." The other 2 men arrested were released. In the case of Ella Barham, 2 brothers were arrested for her rape and murder, Otis and Laura Davidson. An axe was found in their yard that had blood on it. At the coroner's inquest, with no evidence or eyewitnesses, jurors suspected the Davidson brothers were guilty. Both brothers were arrested. In less than 9 months after Ellis's murder, 30-year-old Otis Davidson was brought before thousands of people and was hanged inside an enclosed scaffold. Before his death, Otis declared his innocence to the crowd and told them he hoped the identity of the real killer would one day be known. However, due to the lack of evidence in the case, January 1914, all charges against his brother were dropped. Many people believe Otis was wrongfully convicted. With the string of axe murders that swept across the country between 1911 and 1912 going unsolved, it was highly probable the public wanted swift justice for the murders of these 3 girls. People were quick to point fingers before knowing the facts. Authorities were under pressure to solve these murders. In J. Sherman Gray's case, without any evidence Gray killed Naomi, the press publicly convicted Gray, called him a lunatic, a psychopath, a deranged killer, and a madman. The public was convinced Gray was the killer and wanted swift justice at any cost. What these spirits told me was verified. Based on the paranormal evidence and the historical facts about Naomi's murder, I personally don't believe Gray killed Naomi. However, if DNA science existed in 1912, everyone would know one way or the other. If what these spirits are telling us Butch Powell killed Naomi, who was Butch Powell? The name Butch is short for butcher, or men were called Butch who were juniors to their father. Was he a Carmel resident? A resident from a nearby town? Or was he a drifter who happened to be in the store that day? In 2019, I closed the Naomi Mitchell paranormal investigation, but continued the research into the Mitchell family and the Lamb House. In the beginning of these investigations, I couldn't understand why I was encountering the spirits of Naomi, Rachel, and another young female these spirits always brought up, Abby. At this time, I want to focus on Naomi. Why would Naomi come to the Lamb House? Why would I encounter her spirit? After doing long, extensive research into the Lamb House, we were able to obtain information and have solid evidence proving the Lamb House was in fact Edmund Lamb's undertaking facilities in the early 1900s. We will go into much details about this at a later date. Edmund started his undertaking business at this location, his horse harness shop, but later relocated his undertaking business here, what we call the Lamb House. A 1912 Bangor Daily News article states, Sheriff White arrives from Bangor at 12:30 and directed that the body be removed to the E.L. Lamb undertaking rooms in Carmel Village. It was here where Dr. Lewis Robinson made an examination of Naomi. Later, the medical examiner came from Bangor and conducted an autopsy. This is one connection Naomi has with the Lamb House. The front section of the Lamb House is much older than other sections of this house. We know from the 1875 map of Carmel, the Lamb House did not exist. Around 1898, E.L. Lamb made a purchase from the Carmel School District in the amount of $28. We believe this purchase was a school building. While looking over old school building pictures, I came across a sketch drawing of this old schoolhouse. Oddly, this schoolhouse looks exactly like the front section of the Lamb House. However, based on these dates, this couldn't be the front section of the Lamb House. Or was it? After doing further research based on the 1875 map, there was in fact another grammar school in North Carmel, here on Irish Road, across from where Naomi's body was found in 1912. But then something caught my attention. Also on the 1875 map, the Damascus School is right here. The picture of this school has a date, 1900 to 1963. In reality, this school was around in 1875. And likely was built in the mid-1800s. The date on this picture is not correct. It's possible this date is not correct as well. I talked with a member of the Historical Society about these dates. He said when these dates and pictures were put together, at the time these were estimated dates and agreed these could be wrong. Is this sketch drawing that of the old schoolhouse in North Carmel on Irish Road? There was another school in North Carmel in 1875, but closed down before 1900. Another schoolhouse was built in 1901 across from this location. Just to make sure, I visit the schoolhouse that was built in 1901 to compare to the sketch drawing. This 1901 schoolhouse is definitely not the schoolhouse in the sketch drawing. To this day, the old schoolhouse from Irish Road, the rock foundation still exists. We take measurements of the rock footing. The length is the exact length of the front section of the Lamb House. The right side of the width is off 6 inches. The left side of the width is off 2 feet. We had to give an account some of the rocks could have been moved when this building was relocated. Although we cannot fully prove the front section of the Lamb House did in fact come from this location, but it's highly probable it did. If, and I emphasize if, more than likely Naomi's father, Phineas, and aunt, Naomi J. Mitchell, attended this school when they were kids. The Mitchell house goes all the way back to the time period this school was in service. And if this is in fact the old schoolhouse from Irish Road, in 1912 Naomi's body was brought into the same building her father and aunt attended school in. There was other information I came across that is not speculation. This fact shocked me to the depths of my soul. When doing research into the Mitchell family way after the encounters with Naomi, I found out Naomi's aunt, Naomi J. Mitchell, who Naomi was named after, is the great-great-great-great-grandmother to my grandson. My grandson is a distant cousin to Naomi Mitchell. Even more strange, my grandson was living in the Lamb House the day I started these investigations on July 24th, 2017. The same month and day Naomi was murdered. After 2019, I never heard from Naomi, nor did these spirits mention Naomi's name or Butch Powell until recently. After the encounters of evil entities from the Southwest Harbor investigation, in February 2021, I packed up the cameras and took a break from doing paranormal investigations. I released a video, Ghosts from Carmel's Past, from prior recordings, and the Rhode Island Paranormal Research Team came to the house. I sat back and let them do the investigation. After encountering evil entities in this house, in the Southwest Harbor house, I had to deal with these dark forces head on. After dealing with these dark forces, the house seemed to be at peace. Although the normal activity in the house continued, something felt different in this house. I kept having the same feelings I had in 2018 when I first started these investigations. In May of this year, 2021, once again, the activity started becoming more intense. The disembodied voices were more often. Once again, the bed was being nudged at night, and the crackling sounds on the floor and furniture were more often. Now, I know the difference between the house making sounds due to temperature changes and the sounds caused by paranormal activity. When the furniture makes loud cracking sounds or loud popping sounds, most of the time the furniture will shake. The crackling sounds across the floor or the sounds coming up the steps last for seconds. These sounds are so loud, it sounds like someone is walking up the stairs or across the floor. Recently, I just finished putting in the AC in the bedroom window. I heard loud crackling sounds coming from the steps. I quickly turned my cell phone recorder on. I was able to capture this on camera. Honey? Anybody in here? One night in the month of May, while laying in bed watching TV, I heard loud disembodied voices. I hit record on my cell phone camera. Did you just say something? The next night, for the first time in 3 months, I pull out the equipment and cameras in hopes to find out what these spirits are talking about. To my surprise, once again these spirits are talking about Naomi. I can hear you. I go to the basement to see if any dark activity is going on. I needed to know before I started full investigation. I take still shot pictures with my full spectrum camera. Out of 40 pictures, this was captured. To me, this looked like a growing mist trying to form into a full body apparition. I made the decision to go forward with a full investigation into what these spirits are trying to tell me. The man that said you killed Naomi. You brought this up again. I haven't brought up Naomi in a long time. Why was Naomi murdered? I know Jay Sherman Gray didn't do it. You didn't? No. You didn't? No, you didn't. Who did it? bringing it up Naomi again. Who did? What's going on with Naomi? Why you guys keep bringing her up? I believe Naomi, Rachel, and Abby are at peace over what happened to them, but I don't think you guys are at peace over what happened to them. Is my assumptions correct? Yes? Why were these spirits bringing up Naomi? In my opinion, they were troubled over what happened in 1912 with Naomi's murder. With the anniversary date of July 24th approaching, could this be why they are talking about Naomi's murder? Based on what these spirits said, they are not at peace. If these spirits were once again talking about Naomi, there is one issue that troubled me when I closed a paranormal investigation into Naomi back in 2019. One mystery I was never able to solve. What happened to Evelyn Mitchell, Naomi's mother? In 2017, while out in the woods off Fuller Road, during the Spirit Box session, something was captured I didn't think was relevant to Naomi. After doing extensive research into Evelyn Mitchell, what the spirit said made perfect sense. Not long after Naomi's murder, it seemed like Evelyn Mitchell vanished from records. In 1942, her grandson, Sumner Morse, was walking down Highway 2. A car speeding at a high rate of speed ran over Sumner. After running him over, the driver backed up and yelled, "The hell with you," and took off. For 2 hours before someone found him, Sumner laid in a swamp with bones protruding from his legs. The next day, Sumner died from these injuries. In an article written about the death of Sumner Morse, it states he is survived by, in the list of survivors, Phineas Mitchell was listed as a grandparent. However, Evelyn's name was not mentioned. This was an indication Evelyn died before 1942. But whatever happened to Evelyn Mitchell? Where was she laid to rest? I was told Phineas and Evelyn divorced. But why? It's as if Evelyn disappeared from the face of the earth. I could only conclude, due to the lack of information on Evelyn, something bad must have happened. When did she die? How did she die? Most of the Mitchell descendants today had no information about Evelyn. It's as if she was forgotten. I finally made contact with one of the great-granddaughters of Evelyn. In our conversation, I mentioned I heard Evelyn divorced Phineas. She quickly responded and said, "That's not true. It was Phineas who divorced Evelyn. She was a drunk." She went on to say Evelyn's drinking killed her. This information was shocking, but after thinking about all the tragedies and death that struck the Mitchell family, more than likely Evelyn went into a deep state of depression, and alcohol could have been her only escape. However, the lady I spoke with had no information where Evelyn was buried. Records were confusing. I obtained this Highland Cemetery burial record. At first glance, this record looks to be the record of the headstone of Evelyn. Below it states Naomi Mitchell, her daughter, date of birth and death. Phineas Y. Mitchell, her husband, not buried here. But then at the top, above the name Evelyn, it shows Naomi Etta Mitchell. To the left, this is the stone of. If this record was the headstone of Naomi, her information should be shown here. Due to this confusion, I went to the Carmeltown office to look over Highland burial records. When I opened the binder and found plot I-2, the plot Naomi is buried in, a sticky note was attached to this page that read, High, standing for Highland, a date August 2nd, 1929, Evelyn Mitch, Avis Shaw, this is Naomi's sister, and I-2. There was a phone number that indicated to be Avis Shaw's number. Avis Shaw died in 1985. Is it possible before her death she provided this information? Avis' husband is buried in I-2. When Avis died, she was buried to the right of Naomi. When doing investigations, it's important to pay close attention to every detail in order to confirm the information is accurate. Sticky notes like what you see here came out in 1980. This is an indication this information could have been attached to this record before 1985. I called the phone number written on the note. The number was no longer in service. I needed to confirm this information is correct. Is Evelyn Mitchell buried in the I-2 plot at Highland Cemetery? When spring arrived, while the ground was soft for mud season, I used a ground probe to see if someone was buried in this plot who doesn't have a headstone. There is in fact a burial to the left side of Naomi. This confirms Evelyn is in fact buried next to her daughter Naomi Mitchell. I am satisfied this information did in fact come from Avis and have concluded Evelyn Mitchell died on August 2nd, 1929. But what doesn't make sense, why is there no headstone? Every grave I found in Highland that belongs to the Mitchells and their descendants all have headstones. I personally believe Evelyn died with a broken spirit. I believe she, and possibly others, blamed herself for Naomi's death. There is paranormal evidence to suggest this is the case. Evelyn, did they blame you for Naomi's death? After doing extensive research into where Naomi was found off Fuller Road, I was able to pinpoint the exact location. This location was confirmed by the grandson of Edith Wheeler, Naomi's neighbor and friend. Many Carmel residents told me there used to be a large pine tree on Fuller Road that stood in front from where Naomi was found. Some say this pine tree and area is haunted. Eventually, the town of Carmel cut the tree down. Some residents close to this area claim there are times they can hear the screams of a young female coming from these woods. This could be why they say this area is haunted. There are in fact wild animals that can sound like a female screaming, but some swear the screams are that from a human female. I go deep into the woods to the exact location where Naomi was found. I set up the equipment. Since this investigation is outdoors, I rely on the spirit box. Right when I turn the spirit box on, I hear a blood-curdling scream from within the woods, not far from where I was standing. I quickly turned the spirit box off and could hear what sounded like a female. This was so loud and seemed very close to where I was standing. This definitely did not come from a wild animal. A dog close by also heard this scream and started barking. I don't know if this is paranormal related, but I stood there in silence. I didn't hear any females talking after this scream. In fact, I didn't hear anyone talking, only the dog barking. I go back to doing the spirit box session before it gets too dark. After hearing this scream, I didn't want to stay in these woods after dark. Is this where they found Naomi? Who found Naomi? Evelyn lost a 1-year-old daughter in 1901. Naomi's murder in 1912. In Rachel, she will be in another documentary coming at a later date. Was this spirit talking about Evelyn's 3 daughters? Spirits can be limited on what they say. It's up to us to connect the dots in hopes to understand their meaning. At this location, Naomi's name was brought up. A spirit confirms this is where they found Naomi. Is this where they found Naomi? I believe this is the voice of Evelyn telling Naomi she's sorry. I have no doubt Evelyn blames herself for Naomi's death. Evelyn allowed Naomi to walk to the store that day. When it comes to the grieving process, a horrific murder such as Naomi will cause people to not think rationally. It's possible some people did blame Evelyn. I don't believe Evelyn ever recovered from the guilt of losing children. If it's true Evelyn's cause of death was due to alcoholism, I can understand the circumstances that led to this. I also understand what this spirit meant. Based on her burial site with no headstone, she was divorced, and the lack of the mention of her name in records, did Evelyn die in a state of feeling completely alone? Was she in a state of grief she never recovered from? Is this the voice of Evelyn? I felt it was time these spirits found peace over Naomi's murder. I can only imagine how upset you guys are over what happened to Naomi. I want to talk to you guys a little bit about it tonight. I'm going to go ahead and run the ghost box. Can you guys please talk with me tonight about Naomi? We know now what happened with Naomi. And I only hope that all of you rest in peace over this. This sort of disembodied voice right in my ear. Did you hear what it said about Naomi? Did you hear what it said about Naomi? Naomi, are you sure that Butch Powell killed her? Is this something that you're positive on? I don't think Naomi would want you guys to spend eternity upset about this. You know that's the type of girl she was, always thinking of others. This was definitely a mist anomaly that went by the front of my face. I felt static electricity on my face and left shoulder. Although I see these mists almost every day in the house, these type of anomalies are rare to capture. I have no doubt Evelyn's spirit is not at peace. At the end of June, on a very hot day in my room, I say what I felt needed to be said to Evelyn. These spirits said something that left me in total shock. Evelyn Mitchell, there are plenty of people that understand your circumstances. You need to be at peace. You need to go be with Naomi. Whoa. Even if I did not believe in the paranormal, if there was no paranormal activity involved with this at all, after looking over the J. Sherman Gray case, I would still come to the same conclusions that J. Sherman Gray did not kill Naomi. J. Sherman Gray adamantly denied that he had anything to do with Naomi's murder. There was newspaper reporters allowed into his jail and talked with J. Sherman Gray, interviewed him. And let me remind you, he doesn't have an attorney at this point. And even the jailer of the Penobscot County Jail talked with newspapers reporters. This jailer told them what J. Sherman Gray told him. Anxious to talk about his case, although steadily maintaining that he had no part in the murder. They blame everything that happens in Carmel on me, and so naturally they blame me for this. He has said this time and time again. Admits having been in the store on the night of the murder, but denies any participation in the murder itself. Alleged slayer of Carmel girl pleads not guilty and is held without bond for further hearings August 6. Prisoner describes his flight, fearing unjust accusation. What was said in Mason's store? The unconvincing narrative of an imbecile. The newspaper reporter talks to J. Sherman Gray about the conversation that happened in the store. Gray says, "They said a good deal. Young Smithy said, 'She's a pretty good-looking girl for a country girl, ain't she?' And the rest of them said yes. Then someone said, 'Sherman, you ought to go home with her.' And another said, 'Yes, Gray's going home with her tonight.' And Gray said, 'No. If anyone goes with her, it will be somebody besides me. I don't know her to speak to her.'" Although Naomi turned 14 4 months prior, she was well developed for her age and was exceptionally beautiful. J. Sherman Gray showed no interest in the conversation. After Naomi left the store, the men told Gray he needed to go home with her. Then they proceed to tell Gray she likes him. According to the Mitchell family, the teasing got out of hand. Regardless, Gray showed no interest in Naomi. Gray leaves the store and starts walking up Horseback Road, but backtracks to Fuller Road. When a murder has been committed, a prosecutor will rely on physical evidence to prove the case. In J. Sherman Gray's case, there is no murder weapon found. In fact, J. Sherman Gray denies he even had a jackknife. Based on the reports, the murder scene of Naomi was quite bloody. When J. Sherman Gray was captured, he was wearing the exact same clothes that he wore inside the store the night of the murder. Although investigators thought there was bloodstain on his shirt, it turned out that was not bloodstains. Even J. Sherman Gray pointed out there is no blood on his clothing, even though they tried to say there was. There was no physical evidence that linked J. Sherman Gray to Naomi's murder. On the clothing he was wearing, they thought they found blood on the shirt, but it turned out not to be blood. In another news article, a reporter was questioning J. Sherman Gray. This is what J. Sherman Gray told the reporter. The reporter asks, "Well, you have got a big sharp knife. They say you sharpened one the afternoon before the murder." "No, I ain't got no knife." "That ain't so. No more'n that talk in the paper here today that there is blood on my clothes. That's my blue striped suit. Same's as I wore hang there and ain't no blood on it. And never was." According to witnesses' statements, from the time Naomi left the store to the time J. Sherman Gray backtracked towards Fuller Road, it was estimated 15 to 30 minutes has elapsed. But who else left the store after Naomi and before J. Sherman Gray left? The distance Naomi walked 3/4 of a mile from the store to where she was attacked would have taken 15 minutes. It is estimated it takes 20 minutes to walk 1 mile. This is based on casual walks. That's 5 minutes per quarter mile. If 15 to 30 minutes elapsed when Gray backtracked to Fuller Road, it is highly probable the assailant already took Naomi into the woods. Why did J. Sherman Gray backtrack to Fuller Road? According to Gray, he was asked by his employer's wife if he could pick up peas from his mother's house on Fuller Road. When Gray was on his way to his mother's house, he stopped by the village store. After spending time in the village store, he left and was on his way back home, then remembered the peas. He backtracked to go to his mother's house. Now remember, it was estimated 15 to 30 minutes already passed when Naomi left the store. We calculated the lowest number, 15 minutes. If Gray passed the exact spot Naomi was attacked, 30 minutes would have passed when Naomi was attacked. Calculating this at 15 minutes, there is no way Gray attacked Naomi. The timeline does not match up with the facts. If it was 30 minutes between the time Naomi left the store and Gray backtracked, this would make it even more impossible Gray attacked Naomi. Did Naomi stop and talk to neighbors while walking down Fuller Road? Could this have slowed her down? No. No witnesses or neighbors said anything about this. When Naomi left the store, this was the last time she was seen alive. There was nothing to distract Naomi's walk down Fuller Road. I personally believe Sheriff White knew this timeline did not match up. He had no answer to this scenario. In J. Sherman Gray's confession, he stated Naomi was just sitting on the side of Fuller Road when he approached her. I then had no idea of speaking to the girl, but meant to go on to my mother's home. Up the road a piece, I met the girl. She was sitting by the roadside. I stopped to talk with her. Nothing special was said. But she asked me who I was and where I was going. Soon after, the girl went into the woods with me. I don't know why she went into the woods with me, unless she was laying a trap to catch me. There was no struggle in the road, for the girl went into the woods on her own free will. All the evidence shows Naomi put up a violent fight from her assailant. This confession doesn't even match up with the facts. I personally believe Gray was manipulated into this statement. This is when common sense needs to kick in. I don't believe this statement for a number of reasons. The reason Naomi went to the store in the first place, her mother was ill. She just gave birth 2 days prior. On this day it was her birthday, and Naomi was helping her mother with her younger siblings. I believe Naomi's trip to the store, in her mind, would be a fast trip so she could get back home to help her mother. Based on the timeline, I don't believe Naomi would be sitting on the side of the road for 15 to 20 minutes. Another fact I need to point out, J. Sherman Gray's confession details he gave Sheriff White were not the same details he gave the reporter. For this reason, the reporter expressed his anger towards Gray when he wrote the article. Sherman Gray has confessed. Much of his revolting statements, which is obviously absurd in important particulars. Sherman Gray, idiot or lunatic. He looks every bit the congenital imbecile that the hospital records declared him to be. His expressions being that of a half-witted country bumpkin. But there is no trace of savory in his countenance. But then they go on to talk about his freckles. Rust-colored freckles are not beautiful to look upon. And they go on to talk about his looks. How despicable he looked. From this point forward, no other reporter or any other person for that matter was allowed to talk with Mr. Gray. Never again was Gray interviewed, or was he allowed to make any statements at his sentencing. During his sentencing, no facts were presented before the court. There were some who thought this was unusual. There's a good possibility that Sheriff White used J. Sherman Gray's mother as a means to get J. Sherman Gray to confess. J. Sherman Gray idolized his mother. His mother was everything to him. I personally believe Sheriff White told J. Sherman Gray, with him going into prison for life or even being put to death, would have a devastating effect on his mother. I believe that he used his mother, against him. And I also believe Sheriff White told him, if you confess to this, we will make sure that you go back to the state hospital and your mother can visit you there. You'll be able to see your mother. But if you go to prison, you'll never see your mother again. If J. Sherman Gray didn't kill Naomi, then why did he run? According to Gray's statements after he left the store, while on his way to his mother's house, it was late. He decided to turn in for the night and would pick up the peas in the morning. He stopped at a neighbor's barn and went to sleep in the hay. For Gray, this was not uncommon. In the morning, Gray heard men yelling his name out and that he killed the girl. Gray, not knowing what they were talking about, feared for his life and took off into the woods. At this point, Gray knew he was being hunted down. When Gray was captured in Brooks, when asked if he killed Naomi, he said he knew nothing about the murder and he had nothing to do with it. For the next few days, when questioned, Gray said he did not kill the girl. Everything changed after Sheriff White and another man came into Gray's jail cell. Then they come out and announced J. Sherman Gray confessed. They bring in the newspaper reporter and told Gray to confess to him. When the first confession contradicted the other, Gray was silenced permanently. But this is what got me. This is the straw that broke the camel's back. When they found the body part in the woods, a few feet away from where Naomi was found, this was 6 days after they found Naomi. Now, when they found this body part, Naomi had already been buried. She was buried on July 27th. I do not believe that they missed this body part when they did the search in the woods. There is no doubt there is an extensive search for this body part. It was not there when they found Naomi. It was days later somebody placed this body part back at the crime scene to dispose of it. When that body part was found, J. Sherman Gray was miles and miles away from the scene of the murder. There's absolutely no doubt the person that killed Naomi brought that back to the scene. Based on what happened in the store that night, the conversation the men had with J. Sherman Gray regarding Naomi, they were teasing J. Sherman Gray. I can't help but to wonder if Butch Powell did in fact kill Naomi. Was he in the store that night? When Naomi left the store, did he actually follow Naomi? When newspaper reporters caught wind of what was going on, they came to Carmel to run stories about this murder, and they turned this whole thing into a circus show. It's a thrilling manhunt in Carmel. Elements of a second tragedy as posse of 150, fully armed, marched in one long line from Hampton Road to railroad tracks. Volunteers from a half-dozen towns contributed to the most exciting Sunday that Carmel ever knew. And when they printed stories that there is a madman on the loose in the woods, this drew even more people into the town of Carmel. Hundreds of people flocked to the town of Carmel, even from outside the state of Maine. They came with guns, and they came with the determination they were going to hunt J. Sherman Gray down. It was no longer about Naomi. It was all about J. Sherman Gray and the big manhunt. And I find it strange reading all these different news articles. Not once, not one time is there a statement from the Mitchell family. In fact, all these reporters were camped out in their yard for days. But there's not one statement from the Mitchell family. And most of these statements in the newspaper articles were from people who were not residents of Carmel. In fact, they even bring in a doctor that got a hold of J. Sherman Gray's medical records, and he talked to the news press about J. Sherman Gray's diagnosis from his records, from the hospital. And this doctor came out with an off-the-wall diagnosis. J. Sherman Gray's doctor disagreed with that. J. Sherman Gray wasn't born mentally challenged. When he was 4 years old, he had a massive head injury, and that head injury caused major brain damage. And most of the people in Carmel were a little confused about what these reporters were writing in the papers about J. Sherman Gray. A lot of the people in Carmel said he was harmless. And the fact of the matter is, there are some people in Carmel that did not believe J. Sherman Gray did this. They don't believe he killed Naomi. They made statements that this was not his nature. When J. Sherman Gray was arrested for stealing women's garments, this is what happened. J. Sherman Gray walked into a house, he stole women's garments, he took it outside into the woods, and he had a bonfire with him. But yet the newspapers turned around and said that he got perverse pleasure by stealing women's garments. That was not true. That's not what happened. In fact, that's why he was put into the state hospital, because of the circumstances behind what he did. J. Sherman Gray had a habit of walking into people's homes, taking things that didn't belong to him. But most of the people in Carmel felt like J. Sherman Gray was not a threat. J. Sherman Gray was tried, convicted in the newspapers. And the more these reporters came out and wrote these stories, the more anger was stirred up in the citizens. In a lot of ways, the Julia Connor case and the Ella Barham case had the same issues. The news media got a hold of the story, and they wrote things in the papers that caused a lot of people to become prejudiced. Now, I don't know if Nathan Schwartz killed Julia Connors or not, but what I did find strange is when police went to his home, they said that he inhaled gasoline. He committed suicide by inhaling gasoline. And what didn't make sense to me was the note pinned on his shirt, confessing to the murder of Julia Connors. But I do know for certain the man that was arrested and convicted for the murder of Ella definitely wasn't guilty of murder. In fact, the evidence was so shoddy, they ended up dropping the charges against his brother. Because people were overzealous, they were certain that Otis murdered Ella. If there's one thing I've learned from these spirits, when a person dies with an evil, unrepented heart, their evil deeds become known in the afterlife. are no secrets in the afterlife. We will be known as who we were in life, good or evil. I can only hope the girl in the woods, Naomi Mitchell, is at peace. I also hope these spirits know the justice they seek will one day be served. I don't know who Butch Powell was. I may never know, at least not in this lifetime.